Good morning and welcome to TAO's next session of our Member Resiliency series with Paul Snyder from Tillamook County Creamery Association. My name is Skip Newberry, I'm President and CEO of TAO, and I'm just going to review a few rules of engagement before we get started. All participants have been muted. Please remain on mute unless a TAO staff member calls on you and asks you to talk. You may ask or respond to questions in the chat box publicly or privately by directing your message to Justin Martinez or to Kara Snow, and we'll monitor the chat box throughout the discussion. We'll ask you all to engage via the participant icon on your screen, and also feel free to engage with us on social media, and we'll make sure that if you take a screenshot of Paul and myself talking and share that, we'll be sure to reshare it throughout the day. Due to the limited time we have, we'll capture all questions in chat and shift any unanswered questions to our member engagement platform, which is called Mobilize. And that's our virtual community where we'll post unanswered questions from today's conversation to keep things going afterwards. If you have any questions about Mobilize, please reach out to Justin, whose email is on the screen. If you have any questions about joining TAO, please feel free to email us at membership@techoregon.org. TAO staff support today is provided by Kara Snow and Justin, who are happy to take feedback, questions, comments, or discuss sponsorship opportunities. A huge thank you as well to Portland State University for underwriting this series. We appreciate their support and sponsorship. It's now my pleasure to introduce Paul Snyder. Paul is the Executive Vice President of Stewardship with Tillamook, and Paul's professional experience covers a wide range of projects and specialties, including corporate responsibility, reputation management, communications, community engagement, and corporate philanthropy strategy, to name just a few. Thanks for joining us today, Paul.
Thank you, Skip. It's good to be here.
So we might as well hop right into questions. I thought it'd be good if you could maybe start by just telling us a little bit about your background and what you do in your current role.
Sure. So I've been in this role actually just about a year at the Tillamook County Creamery Association. In most other companies, this role would be a corporate affairs role because it's inclusive of our communications, internal and external, our whole environment and community impact platform, as well as government relations and member relations, which in some cases would be almost like shareholder relations because we're owned by farmers, so they're our shareholders. But Tillamook's a bit of a different cat in terms of a company, and so instead of hiring someone like from a comms background or something, they wanted someone from a CR background to lead this function and serve on the executive team. So that's why I'm here. I moved here about a year ago from Atlanta. In Atlanta, I was previously the Global Vice President of Corporate Responsibility for Intercontinental Hotels Group. So think Holiday Inn, Holiday Inn Express, and all of those brands. And I was with that company for 15 years. And I'd started out in operations and marketing and strategy. But over the course of my career there, I just increasingly got really enamored and engaged by the fact that corporate responsibility, whether it was around social justice or around sustainability, was really sort of a next wave of corporate innovation and business optimization. So I was increasingly getting involved in that in operations and marketing roles at IHG until finally they said, why don't you just do this full time? And so that's how I came into a corporate responsibility role at IHG through a hotel background. And that's what brought me here to Portland.
Great. So thinking a little bit about the health crisis and how that's impacted Tillamook, you have producers, manufacturers, parts of your supply chain in terms of the businesses you work with, and all of them had to stay healthy and running and continuously operate. So I'm wondering, how did you manage to keep operations running smoothly and take care of those folks during the crisis?
Well, when this all sort of came, and of course we all remember as long as ago as it seems, it came really, really fast and furious as quickly as developments accelerated. The first thing that we did was make our number one priority, both expressed and in action, the health and well-being of our employees. And so the very first thing that we started focusing on is how do we keep our manufacturing employees safe and well, and how do we keep our office employees safe and well? So from the easy stuff that everybody's done, like closing the corporate office and having everybody work remote, to instituting an even higher level of best management practices in our plant environments, which were already clean. I mean, they're food production environments, so they were already, highly sterile environments, to make them even more so. And so that was really the first and foremost thing we focused on, which is how do we keep our people safe? And then the other thing that we did in parallel to that is how do we support our producer owners? What do we do for our farmers in terms of making sure that where they need it, where they have PPE or whether they've got access to government assistance and other types of things. So we also had a big broad-based effort in terms of how we made sure that we supported them, because we have a stakeholder mentality and approach here at Tillamook. And so, our owners and our employees, they were, obviously pretty important to us. And then the next one that we started really focusing on was our community. And that's where our community response came from.
Great. A lot of our members at TAO are often wondering, how do they make an impact in the community? And they can do so through financial contributions, volunteerism, et cetera. And I know that Tillamook recently made a sizable donation to support Oregonians who have been impacted by the coronavirus. And I'm wondering, what did you all take into consideration in terms of the amount, the timing, and the desired impact?
We had a couple principles that we put together in terms of our community response to the crisis. The first one was the scale of our response has got to match the scale of the crisis. And so, as disruptive as this has been to our communities and to our state, nation, and the world, we didn't feel that we could have a response that, quite frankly, didn't disrupt us very much. It's like, that just would feel that we weren't, quite frankly, responding to scale. So that was one of our primary principles, was scaling our response to the crisis. The next one is making sure that we actually kept as our true North Star in every decision we make about how we were going to respond, maximizing our impact to the community. And so that's why when we came up with the $4 million number, it's got a lot of component parts to it. So some of it is donated money, some of it is donated product, some of it is assistance that we've given directly to for instance, our plant employees have all been enjoying a $2 an hour premium to their wage to this day. We have not stopped it. We did things also, like we had to close our visitor center on the coast, which was a bummer because, that's a great place to go and get some ice cream. But we kept all those employees on payroll and that type of thing. So, for us, what it's like, do you do financial? Do you do product? What do you do in the community? We didn't take an or type of approach. We took an and approach, all again guided by how do we maximize our impact in the community. And then the last thing I think I would point to is finding ways to partner. This is a crisis where none of us are acting alone. We're all acting in concert. And so we've really, not just within our environment and stewardship and how we're executing the COVID response, but across our company, how are we partnering even more robustly, either with other industry colleagues? I can tell you that our operations folks have been partnering with state regulators to great effect in terms of, getting ourselves close to getting to understanding what we're doing in plant, us understanding what they're trying to do in the community so we can address outbreaks together. And so really that partnership thing, and us partnering with nonprofits, our suppliers, you name it, our whole partnership platform or partnership dynamic within the company has really ratcheted up. So those would be the three things, our scale the impact, maximize the impact, and then partnership.
So thinking about the partnership platform that you put together or built upon, if is already in place as part of this, wanted to focus a little bit more on that for a second. And the nature of this crisis is such that it's not a single event where it's then back to normal after we've recovered, right? It's like an ongoing series of crises, right? And spikes. And so the uniqueness of that has posed challenges to a lot of organizations that are trying to figure out how to maintain a connection to the community and to their customers and to their employees. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you envision the platform continuing to serve the community through the CSR function going forward.
Well, I think a lot of the relationships that we're forging right now in this time of crisis, and a lot of, quite frankly, the programs that we're standing up are going to endure long after the crisis. Admitting, and that's a recognition of the fact that post-crisis is not going to look like pre-crisis, like everybody says, right? We are going to have a different world. So a couple of examples are going to be, you know, we've stood up an employee matching platform. So we're allowing our employees to find the local heroes in their neighborhoods and communities and the nonprofits that are helping support their local communities, or, you know, their specific things that our employees feel a sense of mission or purpose around. We're going to match funds to that. That's going to endure after this. We've always had a great partnership with the Oregon Food Bank. That's even become more robust in terms of, you know, the product donations we have flowing to them, and of course how they're addressing food insecurity through our state. We've got new partnerships, again, as I mentioned, with the state regulators, and I really do have to point to them. The health officials in Morrow and Tillamook counties and at OHA in the state. I mean, they have, you know, gosh, government folks get such a bad rap, you know, bureaucrats, whatever, all the rest of us. I got to tell you, we have been so impressed and gratified and, quite frankly, grateful for the kind of partnership we've got from state regulators. They've been our partners in getting ready and responding to this, not our school marms, you know, sort of wrapping our knuckles. So I think a lot of this stuff that we're doing right now, quite frankly, is not going to, just like the rest of the world's not going to revert to pre-COVID, we're not going to revert to pre-COVID in terms of our partnership platform. And we're actively asking ourselves, as we're putting together these partnerships, you know, what does it look like, not just for today, but for tomorrow and going on? And so in the moment where you're responding to the specifics of the crisis and how you're partnering with someone to respond to it, also having discussions about, okay, so how do we not only endure the current crisis, but how do we work together to help our community recover from the crisis into the future? We have those discussions right now, and that does, I think, a couple things. Number one, it's just nice to have a conversation sort of on the front side talking about actually rising up out of the crisis as opposed to enduring it, so it's a psychological salve. But also it brings a real strategic lens into the choices you're making right now, right? So all of us are making choices about how we respond to the crisis right now. And when you're thinking about the two parts, enduring and recovering, when you bring in that recovery element, your choices for actually how you endure become better. They become more strategic and, quite frankly, more self-reinforcing. So those are things that we just know are going to continue on after this. And I guess the last thing I'll say is, you know, one of the first things I started seeing out there in terms of commentary on the crisis is this crisis isn't creating so many new trends, but it's accelerating a lot of the trends that were already there. So, you know, the change in the office environment has been radically accelerated. You know, the shift to not going to a grocery store but having it delivered, you know, that's been radically accelerated. Same goes true for us. We were already in the midst of planning and pushing on a number of fronts to deepen our ties within the community, because Tillamook is on a journey to become a national brand. But this is our home, this is our headquarters here in Oregon and out on the coast. And so we were already doing a bunch of stuff to, quite frankly, deepen our bonds with the community, whether it's nonprofits, NGOs, trade associations, you name it. We already had those in train. This has just accelerated that. And so that's how I think all of this stuff, quite frankly, the transformation that's happening is going to be one that is going to go on and endure long after this crisis is over.
That's great. I mean, at Tillamook, you've got a relatively sophisticated CSR function. In your previous role, you know, a pretty large organization that you worked for as well. I'm wondering, what sort of advice would you give to smaller and medium-sized entities that are trying to kind of dip their toe in the CSR water? How can they have a community impact in a way where maybe they don't have a formal CSR function with a whole team? Mm-hmm. What are the first steps you'd recommend?
The first one is, I'd say, realize that there are people within your organization that want to do this work. There are people that feel a sense of motivation and mission about your company and about how your company interacts and supports its community. So the first thing I think often people do is like, well, who are we going to get to sort of organize this stuff and do this stuff? They're there. You just got to find them. I guarantee you there's not an organization, no matter how small or big, where there isn't just a group of people that are just waiting for someone to, quite frankly, send up the bat signal and say, would somebody like to start working on this? So that's the first thing. The second thing is, when you start small and focused, this is, you know, when you're engaging with the community, it's like anything else. You're learning a new muscle if you haven't done it before. And so start small and focused, and let yourself fail and let yourself stumble, and that's okay. The important thing is to try and do something, and don't let a bunch of, quite frankly, meeting fatigue come to the fore because you're trying to figure out the perfect way to do something. Just start doing something. Just try it out. Try a day of service with a community-based organization. There are lots of great folks here in Portland that can help you. Hands on Portland can help you think through some of that type of a thing. They've got great advice. We've got the Oregon Association of Nonprofits can give you some advice. So you can reach out to those folks about how you take some of those initial steps so that you can start learning and building some muscle memory. And the last thing I would suggest is find something that somehow resonates with your people and its business. I often like to point to things like, I always found it funny when you'd see like RJR Tobacco donate like $1 million to the American Cancer Society. It's like, okay, so they're going to confession, right? They're trying to make up for their sins. To me, it's always so much more motivating and, quite frankly, authentic to your stakeholders when you do something that somehow is resonant with your business. So for instance, Avon and their work on breast cancer, the work that we do here at Tillamook in food insecurity, or advocating for agriculture or healthy kids. Make sure that it aligns somehow with the business, because quite frankly, in a conscious capitalism framework, which is sort of how I think about things, or creating shared value, whatever latest Harvard Business Review article you've just read, the fact is that when you do this stuff right, it's not, quite frankly, a zero sum between your business. It's actually additive to the business. And let it be additive by making sure that somehow it's resonant or connected with your business.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, in terms of this notion of conscious capitalism, how would you define that to someone who maybe isn't aware of the movement or what it entails?
Sure. So and look, I'm an adherent. So this is a biased viewpoint in terms of I believe in this stuff. But there is a fight going on between conscious capitalism and crony capitalism. And crony capitalism, quite frankly, is where you've got, it's not really a free market. You've got actual structural impediments to innovation, structural impediments to disruption, structural impediments to, quite frankly, wealth transfer and all sorts of other stuff. It's sort of like capitalism at its worst. The flip side of that, conscious capitalism, which recognizes that no business, quite frankly, ever maximizes its utility to its stakeholders unless it actually takes all those stakeholders into account. And so a shareholder-driven business tends more towards the crony capitalism, because the only ones, quite frankly, that they say ultimately should govern every decision is, what's the shareholder point of view? Conscious capitalism says, well, hold on, there are our owners, whatever form they take, public or private, but there are also our employees and our communities and our partners and all the rest of those types of things. And the fact is that conscious capitalism recognizes that when you take a stakeholder mentality and you realize that there isn't a zero sum between doing good for the world and doing good for your business, that they're actually additive to each other, they grow the pie bigger, then you start winning. Then conscious capitalism starts winning. All of the protests, in a lot of ways, I say, are protests against crony capitalism. And the time is now for conscious capitalism to step in and say, we have a better answer. I believe in this stuff. And I believe that now is the time, quite frankly, where we're going to see who's going to win. Will businesses step up in this crisis? Because governments can only do so much. Nonprofits can only do so much. If you look, actually, there's a great graphic that a consulting firm in Boston called FSG did once, which showed concentric circles of like, what's just the financial firepower of a nonprofit versus governments. And then there's business, which is like this biggest circle. When you have business starting to step into the breach and start to address societal opportunities, challenges, problems, however you put it, you're bringing the biggest gun to that gunfight. Business is going to actually have a role to play. And if we do it right, and if we step in right now and have a role to help us all recover from this crisis, then we're going to help win the war against crony capitalism. And capitalism in some quarters is a bad word, but I point to the fact that capitalism has generated more wealth, has generated more progress in the human condition over the last 200, 250 years than any other political or socioeconomic movement. So when it's done right, it really does amazing things for humankind. When it's done wrong, it works the opposite. So let's use this time to try to win that fight.
I think you made a really, really great point around sort of how conscious capitalism is really about taking a multi-stakeholder view of the business. It's not just the shareholders that you're beholden to, but your customers, employees, the broader public. And I think a lot of businesses right now are trying to figure out how to navigate taking some steps, being out there, taking a stand, doing contributions to the community in a variety of different forms. But it's also fraught with some risk to the company. And you're also responsible for the communications function. And I'm wondering, are you seeing sort of a playbook emerge for companies that are trying to figure out how to, like, you know, kind of navigate this new world where the demands are coming from multiple stakeholders and they have to be very careful and not over-promising and under-delivering? You mentioned the tie to some sort of aspect of the business. I'm wondering, is it values? Is it the nature of the product or service the company provides? I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about some of your thoughts on that.
Sure. It can be either of those things in terms of the resonance that I talked about. It can either be to your company's heritage and history. It can be to your corporate values. It can be towards your product or service. When it comes to what you're going to do, in this realm in particular, people are less and less interested in promises. They're more and more interested in action. And so from a communications point of view, you know, I would actually argue that just act. You know, don't sit and say, we are going to do this, right? That's what everybody wants to do right now, whether it's, quite frankly, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement or what's going on in terms of pay inequality and all the rest of it. There are lots of promises being floated out there. You've got Larry Fink, the head of the largest private equity firm in the world, saying we're going to take sustainability metrics into consideration in our financial investments. Those are all just words. Quite frankly, increasingly, the millennials, who are now the largest segment of the purchasing public, they're really not interested in words. And not only that, but they don't believe you when you're talking anyway. So what I would say is, you just decide what's the authentic tie to your business and then just start acting. And then when you've got something to actually demonstrate, say, we did this, as opposed to we will do this, then you can start communicating that. And the fact is, what you'll find is when you actually focus on action more than communication or promise, you'll find that actually other people start talking about the action you're taking, which means you don't have to. And that's so much more authentic in today's marketplace. In an attention-based economy, when you've got other people talking about the things that you're doing, that is, quite frankly, the most authentic way you do things. That, you know, here's the secret for everybody. Marketing and corporate communications are getting outsourced to social media against all of our will, right? That's what's happening. The most impactful ways that companies talk about themselves is not talking themselves at all. It's having other people talk about them and their products. So that's why action more than ever is the important part about whatever you're doing from a corporate perspective. Again, as long as it's authentically tied to some part of your business.
Mm-hmm. One thing that I've been thinking about is, you know, is Oregon continues to grow and become whatever it's going to become. A lot of population trends are pointing to an in-migration that's continuing for some time. The culture may or may not change as a result of that. I'm wondering, with your perspective of having freshly arrived in Oregon and also having worked on the East Coast, do you see some distinctions between how businesses approach kind of the stakeholder or conscious capitalism between, say, other parts of the country and now the Northwest? And I'm wondering if you could just, you know, share some observations in terms of where you'd like to see this region go or position itself at the collective level when thinking about where business at the collective level can make a name for itself in the Northwest.
Yeah, so let's get into some, you know, gross generalizations here, but that doesn't mean they're not true. You know, here's maybe something that sort of illustrates this. It's part of sort of like my own journey. So at IHG on the East Coast, and we were a London-based company with very much a shareholder mentality. You know, we all have like internal brands in our companies. My internal brand was like one of the most highly collaborative people in the country, right? Just brought people together and got them to do stuff and all the rest of this. When I came here, what emerged as part of my brand is, wow, he speaks really directly, right? And so, you know, the change in context, there is a difference. There absolutely is a difference. And I think it actually speaks to the fact that Oregon in general, Portland in particular, there's so many things about the dynamics of this, both in terms of our community and in terms of the business. It's so collaborative. It's so collegial. I mean, people talk Oregon nice. Well, whatever. But the fact is that what I've really found within businesses and across businesses and in community is there's a sense of togetherness. There's a sense of community that's really, really powerful. It's an imperfect sense of community. We imperfectly execute against that community sense. But there's not a lot of I'm right and you're wrong that I see. There's some of that, but there's a lot of, well, what can we do together? That dynamic is there. We can't lose that as we have some really important arguments and debates around what's the best way to posture the police force and what's the best way to encourage economic development while not, quite frankly, doing it on the backs of hourly workers. Those are all good debates to have, but there's definitely, I think, a collaborative dynamic within Portland and Oregon that quite frankly, we can better leverage competitively as we are in a war for talent across the country or across the world. Another thing that I see as an opportunity, and this is a little bit more particular Portland, but I think it goes true to an extension of Oregon, which is there's so many things in terms of taking a long view that we have done right. So let's talk about public transportation. If you look at Portland's public transportation, look, I came from Atlanta, and we don't talk about Atlanta's public transportation because it was wrong-headed and it was short-sighted and it was half built out. The fact is the long-term investments that Portland's made in public transportation has a payoff. It is an attraction for people coming here, whether they're coming here from San Francisco or the East Coast or whatever. Taking that long view is something I think we can do more of, whether it's approaching the homelessness problem, whether it's approaching business development. Duncan Wise and the stuff that they're doing with the Oregon Business Plan is brilliant stuff, and it takes a long view. So I see Oregon having some, quite frankly, some really endemic foundational strengths that, to be honest, in my East Coast direct kind of way, have been under-leveraged and underutilized by the state and by the city. I think we've got more to do. We're imperfect. We've got lots of our own house to clean up, but we have a lot of strengths and arguments to make out in the marketplace that we just haven't been very vociferously, but I think we could, that would want more businesses to move here, that would want more people to move here and enjoy the weirdness that is Portland and the grandeur that is Oregon.
Well said. We've got a couple minutes left. I'm getting the warning. And we've subjected all of our guests on this series to the same somewhat irreverent question at the end, which is, in this virtual environment we find ourselves, any funny mishaps or stories in terms of awkward moments that either you've encountered or your colleagues?
I'll mention two, and one maybe is a little bit sent to the target for Technology Association of Oregon, which is my internet service up on Vista Hill across from the Vista Spring Cafe has been horrible. And it has seemed that my screen freezes or calls drop right when I'm in the middle of making like a brilliant point to like my colleagues or something. And so it certainly has been true that it has been an exercise in really ramping up my meditation techniques to go through the frustration of like dropped calls because of bandwidth and that type of a thing. So if you guys could fix the internet access up on Vista Hill, just get right on that for me, Skip. I'll buy you a beer at Breakside.
Sounds good.
The funny thing that's happened is we have a 9-month-old golden doodle puppy, and great dog, very sweet dog, absolutely freaking hates the mailman or any delivery people. So I'll be on, I've mostly been working at our dining room table down on the bottom floor, and I'll be on there, and then all of a sudden Ted will just freak out and just start barking at the door and all the rest of it. And then I scramble to try to hit mute and all the rest of it. So everybody who now has been on conference calls with me knows that whenever they hear the dog barking, that our mail's getting delivered, essentially. So I guess, I don't know if that's funny, but that's certainly one thing that I will never forget for all these conference calls is just hearing the dog bark.
Those are two great stories, Paul. I would have to say that you're the first person on all the ones that we've done so far that actually had two really entertaining stories to share. So kudos.
You're too kind.
Well, that concludes our time. Paul, I want to say thank you for taking some time out of your busy schedule to spend with us this morning. And if we have additional questions we get from folks during the course of this conversation, we'll share those with you and your team afterwards. Thank you to everyone who took some time out of their Friday morning to join us. And of course, thank you again to Portland State University for their support. And that's a wrap. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Be well.
Thanks, you too.